We're here with Simon Henry, Non-Executive Director for Rio Tinto. And Simon, you've just come from a panel session at the Natural Resources Forum ESG Week, which really focused in on natural resources and the energy transition. Now, this is a huge topic, but do you want to pick up on some of the key aspects that you discussed?
Indeed, thank you for the opportunity. I'm always struck when meeting people in the industries, but from different perspectives, just how common some of the views are around the scale, the complexity, and the longevity, the time scale of the challenge that we all face. And we often bring a different perspective, but one of the big takeaways for me is that whatever people say we're moving in the right direction, it actually tends to mean that for us all to get to where we want to be, we all have to get it right simultaneously. And all the actors who are not in the room, and particularly governments, but also society at large or their representatives, also need to understand and be aligned. And I think that in particular is a missing piece.
So the alignment as well as the understanding being missing?
I think what, sadly, the complexity and the longevity issues don't get translated well. Perhaps that's a challenge as much for the industries themselves as it is for those who do communication, whether it be media or otherwise. There are questions and answers that are maybe just too big to get your head around at any one time, so you do need to compartmentalize it down in terms of how do we change customer demand in the right way? How do we set policy frameworks that encourage both the right behaviors at the customer end, but also either incentivize or penalize the supply chain in the right way? How do we bring finance in on both supply and particularly infrastructure in a way that comes in quickly enough to build a platform on which everything else can happen? And bringing all that together, even in the short term, the scale is mind-boggling. I've seen recent figures up to $9 trillion of investment per year, which is mind-boggling. But there's also the fact that even the shorter investment life cycles are 5 to 10 years, which is beyond, in democratic countries, it's beyond the political life cycle. And therefore, unless you have significant cross-party support for long-term policy frameworks that will remain stable and that contain both incentive and disincentive in the right proportion. Things like carbon pricing, for example, is an incentive. It's not a disincentive. and if that is understood, it can drive over time very significant changes. But everybody has to agree this is what we want.
So do you think this is a bit of a mindset change in terms of seeing the opportunity, seeing the competitive advantage perhaps in some of these aspects, rather than seeing this as a threat or a tax that you need to pay to play?
I think there's huge advantage because it's a bit like motherhood and apple pie. Nobody can disagree with the objective. By 2050, we want to be net zero because we don't want to destroy the climate, but also that would mean we have an energy system in particular, but also agriculture and industry that are just much more sustainable forever because we're making the most of renewable resources and not finite resources. And in that process, other resources such as commodity, minerals, iron ore, copper, aluminium will be used in a much more efficient way, and it would be looking much more, I think, focused and long-term about recycling and the circular economy. So these issues will build on each other, and so we will be, as humanity and society in general, in a much better place. But we've got to get there first, and we have to start tomorrow, not in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
And to start tomorrow, we've got to recognise just how fragmented the current approach is, and how it is difficult for governments to project to their voters and taxpayers that voters and taxpayers have to change their behaviour, and many other things have to change as well to get to that desired end outcome.
So with regards to that need to change within, say, a typical large mining company, there comes a point where someone somewhere is going to say, hang on, we can't change too much. So how much of this change should be driven or absorbed by the mining companies versus perhaps some of those other stakeholders that you mentioned earlier?
Well, it comes immediately to the fore when you're looking at 5 to 10 year decarbonisation of our own operations, where it will involve, for example, renewable electricity. That's new supply on a firmed basis in remote locations or in locations where the current electricity supply is coal or gas dominated. Making that work economically at scale, we're currently looking in one Australian state for 4 gigawatts of firmed power for one set of industrial activity. That is a very significant investment. Now, returns on investment need to be both tangibly positive but also stable over time. And getting both of those needs multiple stakeholders to come together. So it's, yes, we can see why the mining industry might take some of the cost because that enables the rest of the value chain to progress in a much more sustainable long-term way. But it cannot only be the mining. It needs government, it needs the power suppliers, and maybe needs the infrastructure providers to also work together.
And so do you think as well, perhaps are we undervaluing some of the commodities that we're producing from the mining sector?
Yes, and if I go back to what's the one single thing that might help everywhere, and that is an appropriate carbon pricing mechanism. And it can be a tax, it can be a trading system, it can be built around incentives on the supply or the demand side. It can be all of the above. But effectively pricing externalities, which means carbon pricing, over time is going to lead to the right incentives to do the right thing. And very few areas in the world is that price, first of all, high enough yet to make a big difference, and secondly, stable enough in terms of just the way it works to be able to support long-term investment.
Do you think that everyone's beginning to align and pushing in the same direction, or do you think that we're still living in quite a fragmented world with regards to that?
You're heading a little bit into the political and anthropological sphere here. I think the United States has made a very clear statement with the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides significant support for and incentives in both the supply side and potentially the demand side without actually using a carbon price that will make a difference. The EU Green Deal will move in that sense, and both of those pull together. I always said, if you look at where is carbon emitted and where is the industrial capability, technological capability to make a difference, it's in the US, it's Europe, it's China, and it's India. Those 4 areas get things by and large right and aligned. The rest will follow, and they'll make such a big difference together. At the moment, the only one that's really connected in and of itself is China, and their 20 to 30 year targets could be instructive to the rest of us, the way they industrialize and get to scale in particular in certain areas, the way they already have done in solar and wind. How well the IRA works in the US, it's already making a big difference, so let's see. I do think the EU and India, it's less obvious yet how that comes together. The UK is a classic example of fragmentation where the government even today is going backwards.
Yeah, which is not necessarily helpful for anybody.
Yes and no. I mean, the UK's emissions are less than 1% of the global total, so our outcome here is not that relevant. But the way that we get to our outcome could be very relevant if it's done in a way that says, here's a good example. I'm not sure that's happening at the moment.
So there are some challenges, but also perhaps a little bit of light ahead of us in terms of the opportunities that we can realise.
Well, I think some, if not all of the technologies already exist. The will exists on the part of companies. I think the capital is there if it can be attracted if in fact the framework for the risk and reward environment for a suitable period is also clearer. There are gaps though, so some of the things that you need to work are there, but I think there are some fundamental changes, and one of them is pricing carbon. Second is societal acceptance of what needs to be done in terms of industrialization or reindustrialization in the West, in terms of the commodities and the big investments that need to be done to put the infrastructure in place, and the changes in consumer behavior, whether it's what you eat, how you move around, or what you buy and choose to do with your time and money. All those things have to change, and they are gaps at the moment that are not being filled.
Yeah, but massive opportunity. I think the future is exciting. So thank you very, very much. We'll wrap up there.
It's very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.